Hey everyone, welcome to On Point. This episode, we kind of get back into the roots and the weeds of what On Point was all about when we started it. Very technical podcast about arrow building, and we have Kyle Davidson on to basically discuss his math and science behind building an arrow. He's an engineer during the day, arrow builder at night, and so he applies that engineering towards building arrows and has equations and stuff. Really cool things of what he's doing here. And really appreciate his insight, and I enjoyed talking and learning from Kyle during this episode. One real quick thing, if you want to support the podcast, there's a bunch of ways you can do it. You can become a patron at www.patreon.com/onpointpodcast. You can donate whatever you feel like it. You can do it monthly, you can do it one time, whatever, and feel free to support us there. And then also, there's some free ways you can do it. You can leave us a review on iTunes. You can visit www.onpointpodcast.com. You can sign up for the newsletter, buy some swag, get links to the other content that I have coming out on the YouTube channel and stuff like that. So definitely tons of ways to support the podcast if you feel inclined, and we would love for you to do that. But outside of that, I will quit blabbering on. I want to get you guys into this episode with Kyle from DCA Custom Arrows. Yeah. Well, I'm excited, man.
Okay.
Let's get this thing going.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
So I've been talking about this episode for a while, and been kind of talking it up, because and as a disservice to you, when we first talked, you were reaching out to me wanting to do raps and stuff, and I was like, sure, yeah, let's make a cool rap. And long story short, I thought that's all you did.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny because I was talking to. Good.
Oh, I was talking to somebody, and they're like, dude, he does way more than that. Like, that's like part of what he does, but he's like, you should probably revisit that conversation with him. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
so,
it was Michael Batiste. So he reached out to me and he said, hey, you should, because he had talked to me a couple times about what I do. He actually wrote into my website and kind of filled out the information, and then I was actually traveling for work. I was down in Jackson, Tennessee, and I was just getting ready to leave to drive back up to Indiana, and it's a 7-hour drive. And Michael was like, do you have a second to talk? And I was like, man, I have 7 hours to talk. What do you want to talk about? So we started diving into it, and then, kind of got through that conversation. That's a whole another story. But then I was talking to him, and he was like, hey, you should talk to Garrett. And I was like, oh yeah, I know Garrett. I built some wraps for him. And he said, yeah, he just thought you built the wraps. And it's funny because that is kind of a misconception. On, my Instagram account, it's all just pictures of the wraps and the veins. I put a little technical data in that, but I do a lot more than that. But as with anything, the image of it sells, not the math behind it, because you can't see any of that until you start shooting them. So.
Right.
Yeah, it's weird, but I do wraps, and then I also do the custom tuned arrows too.
Well, by trade, you're an engineer. And so what I've been telling people is that, okay, we have an engineer here, and then now he's applying that to building arrows. And so if you can, go into depth here of the whole part of you that I missed the first time we talked.
Sure. So kind of how I started out in archery, my buddy, TJ, that actually owns Rack Hub, if anybody's heard of that. But he got me into it, and he is a strict hunter. And so, he has a bow, he has arrows, he practices like crazy. But other than that, I mean, he doesn't know any of the specifics of how a bow works, or, how an arrow reacts, or anything like that. So he ended up selling me his bow. And it was kind of a low powered, 310 IBO, bow. And I ended up shooting a few arrows that I bought at the archery shop. And it was just, here's some arrows that are 30 to 60 pounds, go out and shoot these. And they just, what's your draw length? 29 and a half. Okay, here, we'll cut them at 29 and a half, and here you go, and have a good day. And so I went out and was shooting, and, I wasn't shooting great at first, but then I was holding steady, and I was holding really steady, especially at shorter yards. And I wasn't hitting where I was supposed to. And I kind of played it off to just archery in general. It's not as accurate as shooting a rifle or a pistol or, whatever. Mm-hmm. But then I started, doing some research and finding out that they are very accurate. And something was going on with mine. And then I started finding out about, there's different spines, there's different weights of arrows, there's, the tuning with your bow. There's a lot of factors to go into it. And so I started, listening to podcasts and doing research, and I was unfortunately on Archery Talk all the time and just taking in all the information that I could. But I think, because of my background, I am a mechanical engineer, but my whole life has basically been in research and development. So like with my current job, the way it generally works, somebody gets an idea about something, and it's either that's what I get is just an idea, or I get maybe a napkin sketch, some parameters for it, and then they just say, go make it. And so I'm responsible for the design of it, and then the, getting the prototypes made, getting SLAs made, and then building the whole thing up, doing the testing, figuring out why, if it doesn't work, why it doesn't work, very diligent on what variables I can manipulate to get my desired results. And so I started doing that with the arrows. I was listening to all the information I was getting, and there's tons out there. You have to have 90% FOC or the arrow's going to fly backwards. It has to weigh 650 grains or it won't make it, to the target, and nothing will happen. All these crazy things out there. And what I ended up doing was just funneling that. And, if you hear something once, that's kind of one person's opinion. But if you hear the same thing over and over and over, then that kind of made it to my list. So it's like things to try. And then I just kept funneling that down as to what I was reading, what I was researching, what I was hearing, and then just started trying those things. So I eventually got a faster bow, and I would try out, different things with it. So I would try a low powered bow, or low IBO bow, and then a faster bow, and try different things with both of them and see which one got results. And I started getting really good results, and, my archery was kind of improving at the same time. So, like I was saying, the guy that got me into it eventually was like, hey man, why don't you build me some arrows? And so I went through all the formulas that I'd slowly developed and started building him arrows. And then a couple other people wanted arrows. And then I started working on spreadsheets and things like that, and my formulas, and getting those dialed in. And it was all just my own personal need to know, and, have to know, really, is what it is. I was trying to candy coat that, but, I think we're the same type of personality where it's like, if something happens, I have to know why, and I have to know why it didn't work, or I have to know why it did work. Right. I've seen your posts, and I've heard your podcast, and I know that it would eat you alive too. So I started diving into it, and then he was like, hey, you should do this as a side project. And I was like, I don't know about that. And then it just, one thing led to another. We kind of came up with an idea and a logo and all that stuff. And then it was more just something to do during our lunch break. And then it became a lot more than that. So like this year, when I started it in January, I was like, well, if I could do 5 sets, it might help feed my archery addiction a little bit and allow me to test more things. And so I was, like I said, hoping for 5, and I think I'm at 60 now, or just over 60 sets this year. Wow. So, yeah, it took off a lot. But
yeah,
on top of that, it was
ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm curious to hear, like, when I'm going to take you back for a second, because when you said you're researching and stuff, what were some things that you kept coming across? What were some of these things that you kept seeing upon your research when you were digging into it?
Yeah. So the main thing that I would do is go out and I could adjust the poundage of my bow a little bit, plus or minus. But the main thing that I was doing was trying different point weights. And so a lot of my friends, or I guess they're customers, but a lot of the guys that I do work for, I end up friends with. What I tell them too is like, hey man, if you're, some guys are like, I just want arrows that shoot really well, and I give them those. Some guys are like, they're super technical and they really want to know above and beyond kind of what I'm giving them. And I'm like, hey, if you really want to get nerdy with this thing, this is how you do it. And so what I tell them is, normally if you shoot 100 grain field point, try 125 grain field point. and then try a 75 grain field point, and then shoot those at short range, shoot them at long range, and then really study them at a range where you can shoot the longest range you could shoot really good groups at. So if you could shoot really good groups at 60, then shoot, 3 of each of them in kind of a random order and see what happens. And so that's what I was doing when I started out too. And I would go through, and I use a program to get the dynamic spine, and then I use all my other programs for the rest of them. Just because the dynamic spine formula, to my knowledge, the best I could figure out, is kind of based around some rules of thumb that have been developed a long time ago. So I use a program to do that, and I would just mess around with different dynamic spines. And then I would get it to a point, like I'd find out, oh, if I shoot these 75 grain points, I get much tighter groupings. And what that was doing was actually stiffening the spine. Kind of just for the new guys that are listening, what the spine of the arrow is, they take like 2 pins 28 inches apart, and then they put the arrow on that, and then they put a 2-pound weight in the middle of that. And how much that arrow deflects is what the spine is. So if you have a 500 spine arrow, it would actually deflect a 1/2 inch.
Right.
So the 500 on the side of it is actually, the higher the number, the weaker the arrow. And kind of had an issue at the range, my home range, one time, where a guy was shooting a big dude who was taller than I am. I'm 6'2" and bigger than I am. And I've told you before, I'm a tall, skinny dude, but he was pulling back with some effort and shooting. And like I said, taller than me, so he had a longer draw than me. And he wasn't getting very good groupings at 20 yards. I mean, they were 2 feet in diameter. And you kind of, as you're there, you're shooting, you notice what people are doing, and his form looked fine. I mean, he should be shooting better than he was. So we're walking out there together, and he was like, man, I don't know what's going on with these. And I said, well, what spine are you shooting? And he pulled it out, and he said, oh no, it's a 500 grain arrow though. And it was a 500 spine arrow. And he was pulling 75 pounds with a 30.5 inch draw length. And I was like, don't shoot those ever again.
Yeah.
Shoot my 340s and see what happens. And it did. His groups went down a lot smaller. And this was before I started my company. And I said, just go buy some 300 spine arrows, get them cut as short as you can, and you'll be a lot better than what you are right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. And then, like I was saying, that the testing that I was doing was with my slower bow, like a 310, and then with the bow, I won't mention the company, but it was rated for 350, and it was probably shooting about we know what I'm talking about. It was probably shooting 338 or 337 on a good day. But I was using that to test to see if the IBO of the bow would affect where the dynamic spine needs to go.
So that brings me to one area that I want to hit is, so you were talking about manufacturers testing the static spine earlier. You
Yes.
were talking about that, and it's pretty much right at 2 pounds. If you look at it, it's 880 grams, or like 1.94 if for the guys that are like Nazis. But like 2 pounds is pretty much it. So I say that because someone's going to correct us if we don't.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I appreciate that.
No worries. And so when you're bending that, like you said, they're 28 inches apart, and then you have that weight there, and then what they don't do, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is they don't do like quarter turn twists. They just measure one spot on that arrow. So basically, they're not like kind of like almost like a knock tuning it, but they're not twisting that arrow and measuring certain. They're not finding like the backbone, basically.
Correct.
It's just one. We're going to hang it from this spot on the arrow, wherever that arrow is, as long as it's 28 inches apart. We're going to do it with the knock facing up. We're not going to twist it a quarter turn and then redo it. So that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, I think that's the way it probably goes too. And then they just have a tolerance on that. If it's a 300 spine, it needs to be between this number and this number when you do it.
Right.
I've actually just been testing a bunch of Black Eagle Rampages and Easton Axis, match grade Easton Axis, and 003 Black Eagle Rampages. And I've been doing that where I'll put them on there and I'll turn them, very slowly and see where, or see how much the spine deflects. And on both of those arrows, I've seen very, very little variation, which is really good. I'm sure there is a manufacturer that I saw that had quite a bit of variation, but it wasn't overly crazy. But those two were really good, which I was glad because I build a lot of those.
Yeah, what was the manufacturer that had more? Are you? You're not affiliated?
Yeah, I'll go. No. So I'm not. I actually am. I just became a Black Eagle dealer, so
okay.
It's not hard to do because all you have to do is kind of sign up for it. Right. But the reason I did it is because I sell tons of them, and it was an easy thing to do. They're a great arrow, but I sell. If I don't sell more Axis than I do Rampages, I would be surprised. Nice. Just because it's whatever anybody fits. I don't try to push Black Eagle over the other one at all. Mm-hmm. But the one that I did see a little more variation in would be, it's just with the gold tip hunters and velocities were a little bit more, as I rolled it around, like for instance, on the Black Eagles, I saw anywhere from, actually I just posted this on Instagram. It was 306 was the highest and 303 was the lowest. Mm. And then on the Axis, it was about the same. It might have been just like 305 to 300 or 303 something. It was really small too. But the gold tip, the velocities that I measured, just a few of them, I saw maybe a variation of 8 to 10 thousandths kind of in there is about right. So it's not off by a lot, but and I actually shoot gold tip velocities like crazy. That's what I kind of started out shooting. And so when I was doing that initial testing, you know, I bought just a bunch of them. They're a great arrow. They're super durable. I beat the heck out of a bunch of them. I've Robin Hood a bunch of them, but I have a lot of them, and they're a good kind of test subject for what I'm doing. Like I said, just kind of playing with the dynamic spine and seeing where that number fits for a given bow speed or poundage in that area.
I want you to, so we covered static spine. I want you to, or if you want me to cover it, that's fine, but I want you to cover dynamic spine and kind of just explain that for the folks that are listening.
Yeah, so the dynamic spine is actually what's happening when you slowly, like you're supposed to, slowly squeeze the trigger or roll that hand back and activate your retention release. But what the dynamic spine is happening is as it's released, if you imagine everything just going extremely slow, so very slow motion, when you release your release and the string starts to go forward, it pushes on the back of the arrow. And what happens to that arrow is all based around a bunch of different properties. So we talked about the static spine. If the static spine is weak, that arrow will deflect more than it should, or that'll just be how much deflection it has in it. Another thing that adds to that is the point weight. So if you have more weight on the front of it, then that will in effect weaken your spine. Something that I tell people is like if you take a pool noodle that kids use and you try to push a bowling ball with it, the pool noodle will deflect a lot. But if you try to push a baseball with it, it's rigid enough to be able to push the baseball. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with an arrow. That dynamic spine, as it starts to push, the heavier the point weight, in effect, the weaker the spine is. Mm. So the other thing you could do is add weight to the back of the arrow. And technically, it's just the center of gravity of the arrow. So if you add weight to the front of the center of gravity or in front of the center of gravity, it'll weaken the arrow. And if you add weight to the back of the center of gravity, it'll actually stiffen it, and not by a lot, but a little bit. And what all that's doing is, if you kind of think of, if you pull back with 60 pounds and whatever weight you put in the back of it, it kind of takes off from that 60 pounds. So it stiffens it, but not as much as it would weaken it if it was in front of the center of gravity, if that makes sense.
It does. And there's also a few other factors. And so basically, just to make it really simple, it's how the arrow reacts once it's actually having the energy transferred from the bow to the arrow. It's what it's doing.
Yes, exactly.
Go ahead.
this is the effect of that string pushing on it. So yeah, it is. It's the static is when it's, you know, not being acted on, and the dynamic is actually when it's been being pushed by the string.
Yeah. And there's, I don't know how we can not get into the weeds on this part too. I didn't plan on covering this, but so I do want to cover types of different cams here, and this is going to be very. You probably know where I'm going with this. There's more aggressive cams. There's less aggressive cams. You could have two 70-pound bows. One could spit out a 340. This is from my experience. One could spit out a 340 with a certain setup. That more aggressive cam could make that actual arrow a little bit weaker because it's just a little bit more aggressive and it's transferring that energy. I'm guessing faster or harder.
Yes, exactly.
Would you? I mean, how do you take that in consideration in your equations and stuff, or walk me through that whole thing there too?
Sure. So what I do is, like when somebody comes to me and asks me, you know, about arrows, the three things I really need, like the critical ones, are the bow IBO, the draw length, and the draw weight. And the IBO speed is important because, like you said, it's basically how aggressive the cams are. So if you have a really fast bow, like a 350 plus bow, when you start to draw back on that, if you look at like a force versus draw curve, that angle is going to be really steep. So as soon as you start to draw that thing back, it gets really hard to pull. You'll get to that peak weight sooner. That's why it's, you know, when you shoot a speed bow, you start to pull that thing, you could feel it. The other thing is when you try to let it down and it really, like, you know, pulls your shoulder out, that's because of the aggressiveness of that cam. The way to look at it is, I mean, like, as far as like energy is in the force versus draw curve. So it's inches versus pounds, and the area underneath that curve is how much work is being put into the arrow. And that's why I still have my first bow, which is a 310. And then I have my current bow, which is a Bowtech Realm SS. It's a little bit faster, but it's good because I could shoot both bows and, like I said, be able to kind of look at that dynamic spine and balance it out. But the cams themselves, like you said, it's really just that area under the curve in a force versus draw length kind of curve.
Yeah, that SS is a sweet bow.
I really
like that bow. Yeah. So you covered a little bit about straightness, and I'm just going to tell you off my experience, and you know, if it doesn't resonate with you, let me know. I trust your results more than mine because you have the math to support it. I just have my ability of knowing what I can see based off of my shooting abilities and my tuning abilities. So yeah, you've got the math. So whatever you say, I would say supersedes what I say. So from my experience, when I'm building an arrow and I'm seeing 0.006, 0.003, 0.001, I personally am actually more worried about the spine consistency than I am the actual straightness. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, because if you have a really straight arrow but your spines like are all over the chart, then good luck.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot of guys that could outshoot a 0.006 to a 0.003. I can tell the difference between a 0.006 and a 0.001 on a good day, but I mean it's pretty damn hard to outshoot the spine. I mean, I agree. Yeah. Do you have anything that you found that you could elaborate or expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. So you were saying that, you know, having a consistent spine or something like that. And from what I've seen, all the arrows today, at least the ones that I use a lot, like I said, the ones that I've tested are the Axis and the Rampage and a few of the Gold Tip. I've seen really, 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 really consistent spines on those. And it would be hard because of the process that things are made. It would be pretty hard to see a lot of variation in those, I think. And I've never been a proponent of 0.001 or 0.003, just because if you think about it, a human hair is about 0.004 roughly. And so if your straightness of your arrow over 28 inches where they measure it is off by a human hair, then you're a much better archer than probably most of the universe, I would say. The biggest thing, and another thing to look at too, is like, I mean, I'm very, very proud of my fletching job. The veins are on there. They're always super consistent. There's very, very little glue ever showing on them. They're all as in a line as you can imagine, but they are never on there better than a human hair. So any variation that you'd see in the shaft, even though it's longer and even if it's rotating, I think that there's more variation with the veins that are put on it than would be in that shaft. And it's not enough, a human hair, if you think about that, it's just inconsequential in my opinion. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that say that I shoot a 003 better than an 006, but man, I could tell a difference by the label. That's about it.
Well,
and the cost.
I've never thought about what you're saying there about, you buy all these super straight arrows or super tight tolerances, but then you go home and you fletch them on a jig, and then you're introducing all these inconsistencies. And to take that even a step farther, you're using probably not the same exact amount of glue on each insert as well. So you're getting, you're getting as many inconsistencies as you want. You probably don't have the same amount of glue on your veins. You're not using the same amount of epoxy on your spine or on your inserts or whatever it may be. You're introducing a lot of inconsistencies, because I know on mine.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm like, yeah, good enough. Like on my veins, because I've never really noticed. If they're good, and they look good and they look straight, just eyeballing it. And I use a jig and everything. I don't. It has to be fairly off for me to go back and scrape that vein off and start over.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just looking at some veins here, and I mean, there's little inconsistencies because the way they just punch these things out, there's little inconsistencies in there, and they don't weigh any different. But I would say, like you were saying, if you look at the variables that are actually affecting the flight of the arrow, I would say the straightness is not one of the major factors. I know there's a lot of people that have been shooting at a much higher level than I have, but I have to look at things, from an engineering mind and looking at them saying, is this an issue or not? And I would say it's not. Honestly, the biggest thing that has affected flight for me and a lot of people that I know is how well the arrow is tuned for the shooter. So you have to look at the IBO, you have to look at draw length, you have to look at the draw weight, and you have to look at what they're going to be using that arrow for as well. It's just the tune of the bow. I mean, I could go out and shoot, like I was saying, you shoot groups with 100 grain point, and then shoot 3 arrows at 60 yards, and you shoot 3 arrows with 125 grain point, and you'll see a difference on the spread of those arrows. And I'll shoot them, so I'll shoot like the 75 grains first, I'll shoot the 100 grains, and then I'll shoot the 125, and then I'll just mix them up in my quiver, and I'll just pull one out and shoot it. And I don't pay attention to what the point is. I just shoot it, and I can always see a difference between the groups, and that's all based on the spine. So like when, I know we're going to get into something big here, but when I look at an arrow and I build an arrow for somebody, the 3 things that I really, really look at, number 1 is the spine, and I don't waver on that. It has to be spined correctly. And I kind of know some ranges that I want to keep people in, again, based on their IBO or the draw length or the draw weight. If you have a really long, for instance, if you have a really long draw, then you do need a little bit of a stiffer arrow. Even though most of the equations take that into account, it just seems like a longer draw length it's more sensitive to a stiffer or a weaker spine. So getting that spine right is number 1. And here we go. We're going to get into it now. The second one that I look at is is speed, and I try to keep that at least at 270. And the reason for that is minimum. At least minimum. Yeah, I keep them at 270, and then I try to talk people out of the 300s. But what I'm building, there's people that shoot 220, and this is for compound too. People that shoot, 220 with a compound bow, and they shoot great, and that's great. But I think that the biggest thing is, and I'm not a huge hunter, but it's shot placement is number one. You can talk to anybody and say, well, if I can't hit it, it doesn't matter the momentum or FOC or any of that stuff. If you can't hit the spot, then it won't help. So 270 from my testing gives you a good variation where you get a relatively flat shooting arrow at 20 to 30 yards. Mm-hmm. If something's walking away or you don't know the distance, you need a relatively flat trajectory. So I don't put a bunch of weight on there to get them under the 270. I try to get a light enough spine to get up to at least that. So that's the speed, and we can come back to that. And then so it's spine, speed, and then the FOC is what I look at kind of third. And honestly, it's just to make sure that it's above 10% and maybe under 18. And here we go.
But, I was going to say, you're going to raise some eyebrows with that one there.
Yeah. And I go up to 18, and I built some that were almost 19 and all that stuff. And it's not that I'm like, okay, I will not build an arrow that's over 20. And if you build an arrow that's over 18, you're trying for it, man. I mean, it's like you're doing everything you can. And honestly, because most spines only go up to 2, like a Black Eagle Rampage goes up to 250, an Easton Axis goes up to 260. And if you want a Rampage will also go to 150. And I don't even know if that's real. I think they just put it in the book to mess with people. But there's a Black Eagle Spartan, which is a 200 spine. And I built one of those for a guy who had just a monster draw length and draw weight. And that arrow was 670 grains. And I'm kind of going off memory here, 670 grains, and it had 15% FOC, but it had 220 grains, I think, up front, but the spine was correct. And so it just fit it, it was fine, but it was a 200 spine arrow. And so when you try to get above, 18%, or, you're trying to get into the 20s or something like that, I think that you're going to get a weak spine. And there are cases where you can tune an arrow for that, but I don't, it's not me working on like my own personal arrow and trying to get above that 18% and shoot it, because you could kind of tune a bow to get it to shoot just about anything. But what I build are for other people. And so I try to get them in this range where they have a really predictable arrow that has good flight to it. And I think that if you really want to pursue FOC or you really want to pursue speed or weight, you can get there. But like I said, I'm looking at the majority of people and trying to not go on, on the fringes of anything.
So how did you arrive at the 18%?
Yeah, that's just where, that's one where I couldn't build an arrow, like I said, with a spine that I thought would get over 18%. And that's really how I came up with that limit. It's like, I could get into the 150 spine, but it's, like, I don't know, 15 or 16 grains per inch. Yeah. And then your arrow speed is too low. So I look at it as literally a 3-legged stool where one leg is a little more important, being the spine, but okay, you want a giant FOC, your speed's too low now. If we add 500 grains to the front of it, we can run a 150 spine arrow, but now your speed is at 160, and it's like,
right.
If you really want to do that, you could do it, but you're kind of violating some rules that I have in place, again, for a predictable arrow.
That makes sense. There are lighter GPIs out there. I was shooting Brent Valkyrie's system. I think I was at 460 something, like a 20% FOC, and that thing was flying amazing. But he's got that whole system worked out, and he's using, when somebody tells me they have like a 20% or 22% FOC, that tells me more about the arrow than what's up front, because you got to have a light GPI arrow to even get in that ballpark. Like I shot a cheetah one time, and those I don't even know what those were. I want to say 6.
Those
GPI.
Are ridiculous.
Yeah. They're like speed freak arrows. And just putting a regular insert and head on there, I think I was around like 12 to 14% FOC, because the arrow's so light. So, and then you're getting into usually a thinner walled, probably a little bit brittle arrow. And so you have to use a better component. There's a lot to it. I know I'm talking to preaching to the choir here. Have you?
No.
Yeah. Have you played around with the really light GPI arrows, and have you found any that to be kind of a way to get people to that 18 to 20+%?
No, I haven't, and it's just because if you go, generally what I put people in is, like I said, the axis of the Rampage, and it's a 204 inner diameter shaft, and it's really good because it's not you get all the benefits of a larger, the standard size, the 246 IB arrow, but you're not paying for the 166, 165 micro diameter arrows. It's right down the middle. Plus, there's a ton of really good components for it. The axis hit system is good. Yeah. You can get the aluminum, which is 16 grains. You can get the brass, which is 75, or you can break it to be 50. And then Bill from Iron Will just came out with his hit system, and so that goes 25 up to I think 100 on that. And so you can get all those components. They're all really good. The Rampage has a lot of, that stainless steel insert outsert is good. So I haven't really gotten into the cheetahs or I guess the Victory XVs are what I would probably look at if somebody wanted to do that. But again, it's trying to find something that is a spine that can handle. It has to be a 200 spine in most cases for me, because a lot of the guys that have a longer draw or a lot of poundage, longer draw being anything kind of over 28-ish, and then, 70 pounds, I kind of have to get them into, usually it's a 250 or at the edge of 300 or something like that. So you can get there. Like you said, the Valkyrie system is amazing. I've seen that. I heard your podcast on it, and he's a very, very intelligent guy. I liked his thought process quite a bit.
Oh,
yeah.
He's a smart guy.
Yeah, for sure. But it's again, building a predictable arrow. So
yeah, well, and I really like the arrow flight and everything, but man, I'm with my axis system and everything. After that episode, I had quite a few guys like, "So you're gonna shoot Valkyrie now?" It's like, I like my arrow setup, man. I like where I'm at. And Brent's system is amazing, but you pay for it. I mean,
yes, you do.
You are paying for it, and I don't have $400 just laying around just to switch systems real quick. Tags not, gear is or buy tags, buy hunts, not gear, and it sure as heck wouldn't make the budget bow build I did this year by any means. But yeah, I mean, it's just,
I was working with a guy. Yeah. I was working with a guy, and he wanted to get into the Valkyrie system. And so I did a bunch of research. I talked to him a bunch, and it came down to the cost. And I can understand if you're going out west or something like that, that would be a great system to have. If you need something that, it would justify that cost, then you can get there. But, and like I said, the engineering behind it is amazing. I love the O-ring in the back to dampen the flex of the arrow, so that you're not getting the insert to kind of break at that weak point at the back. But yeah, man, it's pricey.
Oh, for sure. I do want to go over. There's so many things that we could go over here.
Yeah.
So from your favorite setup, where would you? So if you were setting me up, I have a just based off of your formulas and your charts and stuff, 28-inch draw, IBO. Let's just call the IBO 340, and then what was your other thing that you needed?
Your draw length and your draw weight.
Oh, 70 pounds.
Your draw 70 pounds and 28-inch. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for that, I would. You're kind of right at a 300. You're lucky I'm sitting in front of my computer, and a lot of guys that call me, I do the same thing where it's just like, well, let's just see what we get. It's like, I have other things to do. I need to do this, but now you have my curiosity.
Well, I've been shooting 340s for 10 years, and I know how much weight I can add at what length. And then I built them to where I'm over spine, so I know how heavy I can get up front before I'm over. So I'm curious to see what your system says, because I've thought about going to a 300, but then I don't, the GPI on the axis are just too heavy for me. If they made like a 8-grain GPI axis, which I'm sure they do with one of their other models, but I'd probably go down to a 300 and then get a little bit more FOC. But
so if you came to me and said, 340, draw length 28, and a draw weight of 70, what bow is it? I should know that.
Well, I'm just going off of past specs. We could just say that was the RX1 turbo. It's probably faster than that, but it's probably like it's probably to be 345, somewhere in there.
Because the other thing that affects that is your brace height, and it's pretty critical because, and that's what everybody's seeing now, is the brace heights are getting smaller. And the reason they do that is because it adds, like with your 28-inch draw length, if your brace height is 6 or if your brace height is 7, that adds an extra inch of push with that string.
Yeah.
And so you'll get extra speed with it. So kind of knowing what bow it is, and then having that brace height with it helps. Let me see here.
For sure. I think it was close to like 6 inches was close to the brace height.
Yeah.
On that. Right now I'm shooting the BTX 31, and I forget. It's a pretty quick bow for what it is.
Yeah. So I would put you, honestly, I probably would look at putting you in an axis. I know you said you wouldn't, but let's see.
Just because of the GPI. I do like the Axis 340s.
Yeah.
Just because of the GPI.
So I would I'd probably put you in an axis, because it would put you, I could get your spine correct. So I put you, in an axis. Your speed would be roughly 273 in that range. Your total arrow weight would be 471, and your FOC would be 13%.
So with that, it would be a 300 spine.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you did want more speed, another thing that we could do, because like I said, that a lot of what I do is an Easton Axis or a Rampage, and the Axis it's 10.7, and a Rampage is in the 300 is an 8.7. And so I was automatically going to put an extra 50 grains in the front. So I would go with, either the iron wheel or the regular brass hit insert with an axis. The other thing that I've done is put the Black Eagle Rampage insert in the Easton. I think I talked to you before about that. And it's just, I like that system so much because it's just, I don't know. It feels better to have the broadhead potentially pushing against stainless steel. I know the stainless steel is then pushing against the shaft, but you at least have the glue holding all that system together between the stainless steel, Black Eagle stainless steel insert into the axis. And that would be a possibility too. You could either get the brass hit insert, break it off at 50, or go with a Black Eagle, because they're the same ID, the 204.
Interesting. Have you used the Focus system at all on the Black Eagles?
Yes. So I'm actually building one right now. I have the components here. I haven't put it completely together yet, but I've looked at it, and I'm pretty impressed by it. I want to see how that set screw does holding that sleeve in spots.
Yes.
That's my only kind of question mark.
Yeah, I really like the system because it makes broadhead alignment. Like if you're one of those guys that wants to align your vanes with your broadheads, it makes it pretty slick. Yeah. Yeah. Super slick. I mean, you don't have to have the G5 squaring device anymore, really, if you're using that. But have you I've been wanting to buy those and then try and get those onto the Axis. Have you tried getting because I was talking to Corey Miller one time. He said he got it to work one time using the Focus on the Axis.
Yeah, you should be able to use like I said, the components between the Axis and the Rampage are almost interchangeable.
Right.
The OD of the Rampage is just a little bit smaller.
Right.
So you might have to sand off a little bit of the Axis, but I wouldn't think it'd be very much at all. So I totally think you could do that. I interchange those components, like I said, a lot. I've even put, somebody that was going hunting wanted a smaller diameter arrow. So they didn't want, the standard 246 ID, like gold tip or any of the other standard diameters. But the axis was too heavy, even with the 16 grains in it. And then the Rampage was too heavy if I used the stainless steel insert with it. So I used an aluminum axis hit insert in a Rampage to get his to tune out right. So, I mean, I interchange the components between them quite a bit. And again, it's just to fit. It's weird because like I said, an Axis is a 260 spine and a Black Eagle is a 250 spine. And so when somebody comes to me, it's like, that could be the deciding factor for sure. Getting that extra 10 thousandths of static spine deformation makes a huge difference. Like I said, getting people in the right spine it's amazing how consistent it makes you. And then the other thing that I do is I kind of have a secret way of determining the spine of the arrow. And I know that we just talked about how consistent these arrows are. And I was the one that was actually saying, yeah, I've rolled a bunch of them and I've seen nothing. But I have a secret way that I kind of find a spine on that. And then once I do that, I mark it on the shaft and then I line the wrap to the mark. And then I get really consistent arrow flight, arrow to arrow. So kind of went off on a tangent there, but
no, because you're leading into an area I was wanting to go, which was your building process, and you've told me that part before, and so I kind of I used to detail cars a long time ago, and I always heard that if the more time you spend in the first step of detailing a car, the less amount of time you're going to spend in the last step detailing the car. Yeah. And so it's kind of like the more time you spend on the first, before you start shooting the arrow, building the arrow, you're going to spend less time after you screw that broadhead in, spending time scratching your head wondering what's going on. And I've been talking to Chris Dunlap, who's an arrow builder too, buddy of mine from Elk River, and he's like, man, just going over his system and stuff, and he's like, just what he's doing with arrow selection, arrow building. He's like, the more I refine my process, the less I have to do, and it's just
that's hilarious because go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead, man.
So that's the funny part. So I build arrows every night. I go to my day job and then I come home. I have two little boys that anything they want to do, I do. If they ask me to do something, we do it. That's kind of my rule. And then I build arrows. And if they want to do something, I do that. And then if I have to stay up till 12:30 to finish a set of arrows, then that's what I do. It's just, part of it. And I wouldn't trade any of it for anything. But my wife was asking me, you've been doing this for a long time. You've been building a lot of sets of arrows. Are you getting faster? And I said, actually, I'm getting slower. And the reason I'm getting slower is because, which was not what she wanted to hear. But, as I build some, I'm like, oh, I could do this or I could do that. And, and I just start, for instance, the inserts that I put in the end of them. I was playing around with a bunch of different glues, different epoxies, different insert glues, all that stuff. And all these arrows that I build, I cut off little pieces of them. And so what I've been doing is trying different glues, and I'll put a little drop of glue in the end of the arrow on the ID of it, and then let it sit up overnight or however long the manufacturer says. And then I'll come back with it and just give it a little push with a screwdriver to see how easily it shears off the inside of the arrow. And the way they make the arrows is they have a polished cylinder, and then they wrap carbon around that. And so when you put something on a polished surface, especially something with an epoxy, and then you slide that off, it's going to be super, super smooth on the inside, which is the way arrows are. And when you have, if you try to think about painting, anything, the worst thing you could do is try to paint like glass. It doesn't stick. And so I was testing all these glues, and I was seeing which one actually bonded to it, because it was easy to shear that off. Once I kind of got the idea that, like I said, it's taking me longer to build arrows now. But so I was trying to mess around with that, and I was like, well, man, that's if I could sand that like you would a something you're going to paint, that would make it stick better. And so now, I'm talking about these like 204 diameter arrows, and it's like, well, how do you get sandpaper in that? And so what I do is I have a wood screw that I use, and I beat up the end of the wood screw so it has some little teeth on it, and I just get in there and I don't damage the inside of the arrow, but it basically just sands the inside of the arrow just a little bit, and man, the glue sticks great in there.
Really?
And then I started thinking, well, if I'm doing that on that, then what about the insert? So I'm looking at these inserts, and they're, really accurately machined and, really nicely machined, which means they're really polished basically. Mm-hmm. And so I'll rough up those with sandpaper too. And so now, instead of just, putting glue and pushing the inserts in, now I'm sanding out the ID of the shaft, and then sanding the insert too. And it's like, that's one thing. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that I do now that I didn't do when I started, and it's probably overkill, but I mean, I know there's two things. People are spending a decent amount of money on these arrows, right, and it's something they're passionate about. And the third thing is they're potentially using these, or usually using these to, to harvest an animal. And I don't want my arrow to be the reason that something goes wrong. I want it to be the reason everything goes right. The reason they're getting them from me is because they want accuracy. They want precision. And probably for your listeners, precision is what I should have said there. But yeah, so I do all these extra things just because, number one, it's in my personality. I can't not do it. If there's a better way to do it, I can't cut the corner because it'll keep me up at night.
Right. Right.
I go over the same because I can, like I said, I can see your post and I see your thought process on it. But yeah, so I go into all these different things, and then, again, just sanding those and doing all this extra weird stuff that I do to just because I think that will make it better. And so now it takes roughly, if just start to finish on a set of arrows, it probably takes 2.5 hours. That's a lot. And it's not because it's not because I don't know what I'm doing. It's because I do so much to it. It's like, so to cut and square the ends, and then put the inserts in, do my spine alignment, and wrap the arrows, all that takes about an hour. And honestly, if I just wanted to, if I did it like a bad shop would, I could probably do that part in about 10 minutes. But it's just because of it's the extra stuff. And the only reason I'm not bragging about myself, I'm letting your listeners that do the same thing know that they're not the weirdest person in the room.
Well, no. And
so
so you have a spine gauge is what you're using to get your backbone basically?
No, I have a spine gauge, but I actually just use that to check the consistency of the spine of the arrows that I'm getting, just to see, kind of quality control, and kind of just because I want to know. But no, the spine, the way that I find the spine, like I said, is kind of one of my secrets that I keep. I tell people, without the herbs and spices, it's just fried chicken. So I gotta have some secrets.
No worries. So what I do is basically I noctune and spine index from there and stuff, and that's just part of my process. And if I am building a batch that which I'm gonna be doing here very soon, maybe I've already done a video series on it, but so maybe I'll do a video series on my next batch. But if guys are wanting to go check that out, you can just go onto my YouTube channel and check out kind of how I shoot tighter groups with broadheads in 3 steps. And it's very basic, but there's a lot of things in there that guys are getting out of it. So I basically do kind of what you do. I don't have the spine checker there, but I do the bare shaft and the nock tuning, squaring the arrow. I do clean out the inside of the arrow with a Q-tip before, just to get all that carbon dust out of there.
Oh yeah.
Yep. And I just follow my process. It takes a lot. What was that?
I said when you sand the inside of them, I basically, for one Q-tip, I get about 3 arrows because of the sanding. Yep. But yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So everybody's kind of got their process here, but I'm still having to dick around with 1 to 2 arrows out of a dozen, and then but these I'm guessing you don't, because these guys that spend the little bit more time, like the Chris Dunlaps, they're getting down to almost every arrow, and I can get pretty much a dozen out of a dozen to shoot, but there's usually 2 problem children. On average out of that dozen that I have to spend more time with, or eventually I just say, you know what, screw it, this is not worth my time, so I'll just make that my grouse arrow or something. Do you find that with your process at all, that you have usually a problem child or 2 in the dozen, or are you not getting that with your process?
So one of the guys that I just sold arrows to, EJ Russell, went out and I just sold him 12. And he was asking me, do I need to knock tune these? Because I always turn them, I always tune them. And he, like literally 2 hours ago, just sent me a message saying that he shot bullet holes with all 12 of the arrows and didn't touch the nocks on them.
Really?
So that, they don't need knock tune. The process that I usually do, I'll spin all the arrows, and they don't all spin perfectly true. Some spin better than others, but it's pretty much universal through all of the arrows. I don't see more of a problem with one over another, like brand wise. They all spin pretty true, but you'll have a couple that don't spin as well. But no, I really don't have them knock tune them. I just tell them to go shoot them. I do send them a bear shaft. So you're talking about the process that you usually use, and when somebody orders a set, I always ask them if they want a bear shaft, and if they hadn't heard of that, I explain to them what it is and how it's beneficial. So again, if we haven't lost all the new guys yet, but as you get them, you shoot them, you set your bow up, you set your center shot at 13/16, and then kind of go through the rest of the process, arrow perpendicular to the string, and blah 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 blah. Get your bow basically set up. And then what I tell them to do is go out and shoot at 20 yards and shoot your bear shaft, and then shoot your fletched arrow at the same spot. And then if they're new to it and they hadn't done it before, I tell them, take a picture and send it to me. And my numbers out there, they send me a picture of it, and I tell them what to do, because basically if you shoot your fletched arrow at the target, when it leaves your bow, if it's, let's say, point right as it leaves your bow, that fletching in the back is going to pull that point around to the front, and it's going to hit the target. So you're all sighted in, you hit, let's say, dead center with your fletched arrow. Your bear shaft, when it leaves the shaft and it's shooting, again, point right out of your arrow, or out of your bow, out of your arrow. When you shoot it out of your bow and it's point right, it'll hit the target point right. But generally what happens is the nocks will be in the same line. So it'll be the point of impact of the bear shaft will be right. And all you need to do is move your rest just a little bit. I mean, like the thickness of a dime to the right. And that will make those points of contact the same. And then there's up and down as well. But, they just send me a picture, and it's hard to kind of keep in your mind which way you move it, especially when you're at the range. You're like,
right,
was it up or down or left or right? And so when you just send me the picture, I tell them what to do with it, and then they get those hitting at the same point at 20 yards. And then once you get that, as long as you have enough vein on the arrow to counteract the broadhead, your field point will hit the same spot as your broadhead. And I tested that with Iron Wheels, Exodus, and Slick Trick Viper Tricks out to 100 yards. And I can hit an 18 by 20 block target, with all three of those heads. And I run, again, that was just kind of the bear shaft tuning and that process. But, and that's shooting with both Blazers. Max Hunters shoot the same with those. So
that's really impressive. And you're kind of going over a bunch of stuff here. I want to kind of focus on a few things. So if I was somebody and I was getting, too weak of a spine or too stiff of a spine, you're going to tear differently.
Yes.
Would you go into that? And then I don't know why that is. Why the right. If I'd be curious to hear why each one correlates to that tear.
I wish I could explain that, but I have no idea. And honestly, when I was getting into it and I was getting a really bad right tear with my second bow that I had, the one that was supposed to be 350, I was getting a really, really, really bad tear. And people were telling me, I had 50% of them tell me your spine's too weak, and I had 50% of them telling me your spine is too stiff. And I never could find a definitive answer on why that was. And that's why, again, I think that having an initial properly balanced spine out of your arrow makes everything a lot easier. So it's like, okay, if you're getting a right tear, then, you know, twist this yoke or move your cam, or, you know, or move your rest. I tell people not to because the bow shops all want to move the rest, because you just loosen it, slide it a little bit, and then tighten it back down, instead of putting it in the press, twisting the yoke, and then letting it back out of the press, and then go shooting again. But I'm like, no. Make sure that they do it with the yokes if you can.
Right.
That's why that Realm SS, it has yokes on top and bottom. And I was like, yes, please. Cause that thing is a joy to tune. It's, you know, you can twist both at the top and bottom, but, yeah, I think having a properly balanced spine for the draw weight, the draw length, the IBO, initially going into it just makes things so much easier. Cause you know that it can't be that. And it wasn't on that bow that I've been talking about. It wasn't an issue with the spine. It was an issue with the riser flex on it, is my belief. But anyway, it's, yeah. So the biggest thing that I tell people is like so they'll send me their information, and then, I'll call them, or we'll get in contact somehow. A lot of times people just send me information, and not everybody gets back to me. So I give them kind of a paragraph about what I think about their setup. But then if I end up talking to them and they're like, yeah, you know, I have this set up and I have that set up, I'm like, oh, you're pretty weak in your spine, or, you know, you're really weak in your spine. I said, your groups probably look pretty good at 20 yards. They probably look pretty good at 30 yards. Get to 40 and 50, they start getting a lot wider than they should. And they're like, yeah, it is that. Or if they're shooting a really stiff spine, I'm like, yeah, you shoot great groups, and you have 2 or 3, you know, 1 or 2 flyers, 2 or 3 flyers, whatever, but a good group. Because when you shoot a weak spine, there's pretty much no way that you can have a great, I don't want to say it that way, but you'll have worse groups. It'll just be a big spread of arrows. With a really stiff spine, if you have really, really, really good form, you can shoot a stiff spine well, because you don't have the correction of the arrow. You know, it's how it's coming out of your bow, and it's also your release. And if you're dropping your arm, or, you know, anything like that, you can get a stiff arrow to shoot really well a lot easier than you can get a weak arrow to shoot well. So the paper tear, I would say, look at your groups. And if you think that, you know, you've been shooting for a while and you know that you could shoot better than that, then that's how I would judge it more than anything.
Well, that's why I'm so close to getting a Hooter shooter, because the bro guys I think are getting one here, and it's like, you know, for my videos, like I like to shoot a lot, and I can shoot. I shoot just as good as most people do, if not better than the average guy, and it's just like, man, a Hooter shooter would really bring home the points of a lot of these videos I try and make, and it would make it easy on me, because I wouldn't have to like shoot multiple groups to wait until or shoot on like a really good day or something like that. It's like, I feel like I'm never doing my test justice if I don't have a Hooter shooter. You know, it's like, that's like the next step in my testing, just because that takes out my variable and completely puts it in the lap of whatever I'm testing. But
yeah, I agree. There's so many variables in archery, period. Right. I mean, that's honestly, I think that's why we all love it. You know, it's like, I started out shooting pistols and rifles, and I'm in Indiana, and the longest I can really shoot regularly was 100 yards, and it just got super boring. And then I got into archery, and it was like, and I messed with everything I had. And, you know, I messed with triggers, I built my own AR, I did everything. And then it was, you know, it was, I definitely don't want to say it was too easy, but I didn't want to get into hand loading and all that stuff. And then the archery, though, because of the amount of tuning and tinkering that you can do with it, that's why I loved it. But like you said, when you're trying to test something, you know, the scientific process or whatever you want to call it is removing variables or keeping variables into constants and just changing one thing at a time. And when I'm telling people to shoot groups with my 75, 100, and 125, which is kind of to give Dudley all of the credit. That was kind of his idea, but he would do it by adjusting the poundage of your bow by 3 pounds and then shooting it. And it was just quicker for me to screw broadheads in and out. But anyway, I tell people, go shoot the best groups you can at the longest yards. I say, but that day, because it's like, you go out, it's like, you get out of work and then you go and it's like, you're shooting and it's about 7 o'clock and you're like, oh, I didn't have dinner yet, and your arms are a little more shaky, or it's, like you said, it's windy, or it's hot out, or it's raining, or, all kinds of variables. So having a hooter shooter would be amazing to be able to test. That's why I have a lot of guys that I build for that listen to your podcast as well, and they're all excited about your broadhead test. I mean, I've gotten all kinds of questions about that. Have you heard of this? Have you heard of that? Yes. And I'm watching it just as much as you guys are.
Yes. Yeah. We've been, we were actually working on the list today, and I think we might get together and do like a pre-episode on each other's podcasts and talk about what we're doing. I'm getting a lot of guys that are like suggesting things, and I love the feedback, and I got some guys that already have problems with the tests, and it's like, man, you don't even know what I'm testing or how I'm testing it. But I'm really jacked. I think our count was, we were originally shooting for 75, and we're trying like hell to get as many as we can. But I think Wes is starting to back that down towards 50. So,
oh man, that's still, to test 50 broadheads. This is probably going to be, honestly, one of the best broadhead tests and most encompassing that I've ever heard of. I think it's outstanding. I applaud you for your diligence on getting it all together and everything. 50 broadheads, though, man.
My wife might disagree after she sees the bank account. But
well, everybody, send Garrett some money and make this thing happen. It's going to benefit all of us. Send broadheads.
Yeah, and we know we're getting these variables out of here. I think we're going to have a hooter shooter.
That's awesome.
And I'll tell you after we get off here, because I don't want to ruin the surprise for all the listeners and stuff what we're going to do. But I've been picking a few guys in the industry's brains that I trust, and I'm like, I'm going to tell you what my tests are, and you're going to poke holes in them. And they're basically like, okay, yeah, I like that one. I like that one. Okay, there's a little bit wrong with that one. I'm like, okay, if that's all you guys got through all my tests, then I think we did a good job designing them. So
cool.
It's I'm excited, not to get off topic there or anything, but
oh yeah, sorry. But no, it's a good thing.
Yeah. I'm just hoping we can hit 50. 75 was awful ambitious, and hey, maybe we can still hit that. I don't know, but Well, we'll see. Do you do you have much of a I lost my question that I had here, but do you have a lot of guys that have broadhead tuning issues once you build them an arrow, or is it pretty much just plug and play?
It is. So we'll get into another thing here. I know you'll be happy to discuss, because I really want to hear your opinion on it too. So again, and I'm open to everything. When I'm sitting at my desk here and I'm fletching arrows, I watch YouTube videos and I watch all kinds of stuff about fletching arrows, about anything. I don't know everything, and I always learn something. So it's like, oh, that's a good idea, or that's a bad idea, or I'm glad I do it this way, or I should do it that way, kind of thing. So I'm always listening to anything anybody has to say. Whether I apply it or not is a whole nother topic, but so basically when they do the bare shaft tuning and they do the like I said, kind of get the bow set up, and I give them a little more direction depending on how new they are, how much they want a little help with it. Once they get the bare shaft hitting the same spot as the fletched arrow at 20 yards, then basically don't have any issues with anything. The topic though that I'd like to hear opinions on it are vanes.
Mm-hmm.
So what I tell people, I build with both Blazer and AE Max Hunters.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I do that is because they're a tall vane. And I've shot the X vanes, the 2.25 X vanes, which are a shorter profile, but they're a longer vane than the Blazers. You know, they're 2.25. And then the Max Hunters are 2.1. So they're a relatively short vane, but they're a taller vane. So they're over a half inch tall. Mm-hmm. And I tried to get the X vanes to work. Again, I liked them because they're a lower profile, and I didn't want them to get beat up as much in my quiver. I didn't want,
right,
because the Blazers, you know, you get them folded over, you leave them like that for a while, and you got to mush them around to get them back in shape. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to shoot the lower profile vanes just for the durability side of things, and I couldn't get them to shoot with a broadhead. So I went out and shot, and that's 3 vanes. I went out and shot Blazers. I went home, stripped those off, and went right back to the range and shot, and it was dead on, perfect. And so I was like, oh, I'm not getting, you know, the correction. Remember I said it was, once you shoot the bare shaft, and you get the broadhead, and then the vanes will actually help counteract that broadhead. Mm-hmm. And so what I've always said is shoot a vane that is over a half inch, and that's why I go with the Blazers or the AE Max Hunters, because they're a tall vane. I have some Max Stealth that are a little bit lower. They're super quiet, and I'll get into that's something else I want to talk to you about. Hear your opinion of that. And then you get into like the 4 fletch versus 3 fletch, and if you put 4 on the back of the lower profile vanes, that'll work for it. But again, what I'm building is like, I'm building an arrow for everybody. And so you can get smaller vanes to work if that's what you want to do, but I haven't found the QE2 fuse vanes. I think they are really nice. I built one with that and really like those, but I haven't done any testing with them yet.
Well, my thing my thing on vanes, man, and maybe I'm a little bit of a simpleton here, but there's a reason that most manufacturers are using the Blazer vanes. I think it's because they're widely accepted. I mean, I've never had a problem tuning Blazers. I've just the standard Blazers. I've never had a problem with them, so I've stuck with those. But I started branching out. I don't really like the AE. I mean, I'm sure they work great once they adhere, but I don't like having to. I use NPV glue because it's fast. It's not the strongest out there, but it's fast. I have about 15 to 20 seconds per vane. I'm on to the next one, and I'm like, I don't have a lot of time, so I'm like, get me done. So I use the NPV. I use the Blazer vanes. I tried using the Max Stealth Hunters and the AE and stuff like that. And you just have to have the special glue and the the bondage accelerator, all that bullshit. You're gonna get me on a soapbox here. If I have to buy special shit to use your product, I probably won't do it. So the AAE, you have to have. My glue won't work.
Primer pin.
Yeah, you got to have all that extra shit, and it's just like, no, I'm not gonna do that. Like, I just been refusing it. But to answer your question, let's make it really simple. Vanes work with surface area, right? Now, there's different stiffness of vanes. Obviously, as you know, I'm telling the audience this more. There's different stiffness of vanes. The taller the vane, the more flexible it will be, depending on also the type of material you use. But basically, it works with surface area and resistance. So I tried using the Blazer heat vanes the other day on a broadhead / arrow test. I was using the Day 6 arrows. I had a 4 fletch Blazer, a 3 fletch Blazer, and then a 3 fletch heat. We're going offset. None of these had a helical on them. And I was shooting great with all those arrows out to 80 yards. They were all within 2 inches of each other. I mean, they were all pretty much, they were grouping for all intents and purposes out at 80 yards. But you tossed a broadhead on there, and the low profiles, they weren't performing. And I think if I would have added a 4th on there, or even made it more of a helical, with a 4th, I think I could have got it to shoot. But if I was you as an arrow builder, I'd like, listen here, I will make whatever you want. but I'm just gonna do it with Blazers because I know they freaking work. I mean, the Q2i, they're pretty similar to the Blazers. I'm not sure on the exact specs, but I think it's the QTI or whatever they're called.
Yeah,
I might have that name wrong. But yeah, I've seen those. I have buddies that shoot them. They love them. I have guys that are really good shots that I'm friends with that use those, and that kind of got my eyebrows. I'm like, those guys are using them. I probably should take a look at them. But
yeah,
I've never mounted them before. Did those take a special pen?
No,
or accelerator?
those mount just like the Blazers. You don't have to do any prep with them at all. The crazy thing with those Fusions, though, so they make a 2.1. It's the Q2i Fusion X2.
Mm-hmm.
I looked it up real quick, but they're a lot stiffer than the Blazers are. So the Blazers, they're, I would say, not twice as stiff, but they're stiffer. I mean, when you hold them, you're like, what the heck is that thing?
Yeah.
So they're pretty good. I'm curious to try some. I might get some and just shoot them and see how they do. The profile of them I like, but the deal with the Max Hunters, and I actually sent them a message. I didn't really get a reply back on it, but I ended up kind of finding out for myself. I'm a little builder, and so nobody cares.
Right.
It's like I'll send them a message, and I'm like, "Hey, I built a lot of arrows. Look at my page." And they're like, "Yeah, whatever, kid." Yeah, and I'm 42, so it's weird. But
that's funny.
So the primer pin on this is for you, and if you ever want to go back to them, and anybody else, but that primer pin, man, you have to. What I do with that is I kind of have a piece of paper. While I'm building, I have a piece of paper next to me, and I'll take that primer pin and I'll just dab it on that to make sure that that primer pin, the end of it's wet. And then when you put it on there, use a bits as well, right? A Bitzenberger.
Oh, I have a boning right now. I should have a Blitzenberger, but I don't. I mean, I really should get one. I just it's low on the list because I really only fletch for myself and do my own arrows, right? And I might do my hunting partners before season, but for the amount of arrows I do, I should have a Bitzenberger, man. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, just bite it, bite the bullet, get it done. So when I do that, I put the vein in there, and then that pin, I kind of scrub it. I don't put a lot of downward pressure on it, but I just scrub that thing because you have to get that stuff on there, and it has to be. You don't want it to run off of it. You want the pin just damp, basically, and then and do that. Really kind of scrub the end of it. Make sure you get it complete coverage with that pin, and they'll stick. I had some come off, and it was either because I didn't use the pin enough, or potentially there was something on the vein from the factory, or somewhere between where it came from to when I got it, it might have had something, a small oil or something on it, or I didn't get enough of the pin on there. I don't know which it was, but yeah, man, they're kind of a bitch to get to stick. There's no other way around it.
Yeah, that's my
and what I do on those. Go ahead.
Oh, I say that's just my main hang up with them. I'm sure they're great. I'm sure they do a great job. I don't know. I feel jaded when I have to go out and buy something else. It's almost like batteries not included,
Yeah. Yeah, and the Blazers, a trick for those too, whatever they have on them, they seem to, when I put my glue on there, I kind of give it a second. I give it a beat to let the glue and whatever it is they put on those to mix a little bit, and they stick really well doing that. I mean, if you put the glue on and then you slap it on there as quick as you can, take it off and then try to pull that vein off, you probably can. Oh, yeah. But if you kind of let the glue and whatever it is on there soak a little bit, I mean, just, give it 5 seconds and then put it on there, man, they seem to stick a lot better. That's a secret. Sorry. I have very few secrets, but that's one.
Is your epoxy a secret too?
No. So what I use on that is the Black Eagle. I I mean, I use, like I said, I build rampages and axes. So I use the Black Eagle insert glue, and I really like that stuff because all it is just, the CA glue or crazy glue with little fine pieces of rubber that are in there. And so when those dry, or as it dries, the surfaces of the little pieces of rubber start touching. And when they touch, the glue sets even harder because, to get CA glue or crazy glue to stick, when you push your fingers together and you get that thin film, that's when it bonds the best. And a really, really side topic here, but something I don't know, nobody's gonna like this, but I'm gonna say anyway. But an interesting thing to do is take a dab of glue, crazy glue, and get a little bubble on like a piece of paper, and then put either like salt or baking powder on it, and push it down in there, and it will be a almost structurally sound piece. You can sand it. I think you could probably drill it, but it's because those pieces, the glue gets very thin between them, and you get this really good homogeneous bond of stuff. In fact, like the carbon fiber propellers that they use, they get chips in them, and I've heard that that's what they do. They take crazy glue, put in there, and then they take baking powder and push into it, and it fills those chips with a really, like I said, almost structurally material. But that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But
that's interesting though.
Side note, yeah.
But
so yeah, well, I think we're on the same page then. The only thing that I want to talk about was the X veins that I used were 2.25 in length. And they almost have the same surface area as the Blazer. That's what made me think that as long as you get above a ½ inch on the height, that you'll get good steering with them. And my theory on
probably right too. And yeah, go ahead. Sorry to cut you off. I imagine you're probably right.
If you have, if you're ever, kind of think about that as you're building them, just to see if that's one variable that does do that. But my theory on that is that the broadhead creates so much turbulent air down by the shaft of the arrow versus a field point that, that quarter inch, making up a number, a quarter inch of that air around the arrow is too turbulent to get good steady correction from.
I
don't know if that's true or not, but
one way to test that is to buy one of these Annihilator broadheads, because I asked them about that. Pretty much I asked him that exact question. I said, is your turbulence, preventing your vanes from actually working? He said no, but you could test that with those broadheads, because if any broadhead's going to cause turbulence, it'll be that one right there. In the air. For sure. That
thing's kind of a monster on the front of it. I have a buddy that actually shoots for them, so I might see if they'll send me one.
Yeah, you could do your own little test with that and see if you're getting, I mean, a broadhead should fly. I mean, if it's going to fly, it should fly. I mean, there's obviously, I'm not one of these guys that says any broadhead will fly out of a tune bow, because if you give me something and your broadhead's not, like, for example, I could shoot a 300 grain broadhead, and then I'm like, well, any broadhead should fly, right? Here's a 300 grain. Let's see how that thing flies. So I don't broad stroke at that, or like a gobbler guillotine, like I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
So I don't subscribe to that mentality, but I agree with most of what that says. But yeah, I'd be really interested in seeing that, because that would be a really really cool test, just to see if those do cause enough turbulence with those smaller profile vanes.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'll see if he'll send me one. I think he might have one he could send me. Maybe I'll see if he could pass it off to you too. We'll see.
Yeah, I've got the Annihilators already. I plan on using them next month.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, I'm gonna get some real. That's the number one. Last year it was the Kudu I was getting asked about. This year it's the Annihilator, and so everybody's asking me about it. It's like, let me build an opinion first. Like I got it right now. It's just theory. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
So let me kill some shit with it first.
That's why we love
I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah, that's why we love it. It's always, there's always something to test. But you're right. If you try to shoot like a gobbler, you're basically putting an airplane wing on the front of your arrow, then nothing's going to fix that.
Right. So, well, I think we covered a lot here, man. There's so much. We we could go into 5 episodes and not cover everything. But is there anything that we missed that you wanted to cover for the guys out there?
I just wanted to real quick. The only thing I didn't cover in my process. So real quick, just because there's a few misconceptions on what I do, and so what people do, they send me their bow IBO, the draw length, the draw weight. I talk to them about what they're going to be doing with it. So if they're just, hunting a whitetail in Indiana, or if they're going out west to shoot an elk, how long they're going to be shooting, because then I'll add a little more speed to it if they're going to be shooting longer ranges, especially if they're a lower poundage or shorter draw weight. So I work on what they're going to be using it for, get those other 3 factors from them. The other thing that we do, like I said, I square it using the whole length of the shaft, not just like the last 5 inches of the shaft. Cut it, like I said, square it. I find the spine. And then I also do the custom wraps, which is what my Instagram page has tons of. But what we do on that is basically they start out white, and they're 100% custom. A lot of times, people will contact me and they'll be like, yeah, I want this, and I like this one. Can you do red and then add this to it or that? So I'll put, their logo or any saying they want on there. Or a lot of times, I'll get a guy that's just like, I like red. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll see what I can do with that. And, we'll get everything custom made so that it comes with the wraps. The wraps have a little line on them that aligns to a spine on the arrow. And I fletch off of that line so that everything is really consistent. There's very little glue showing on all the veins. We talked about the Max Hunters. I do them one night, and then the next morning I get up and I'll roll the arrow in my hand to check them and make sure they're all on there and holding well. And then I'll go through and pull all 3 of them to make sure they're on there. Then I number them and actually weigh every single arrow, and then I record that. And so when you get a dozen arrows, you get a spreadsheet that has every single stat on it that you could imagine. It has your bow specs, it has your kinetic energy, all the weights for all the components on it, and then momentum, kinetic energy, front of center, your estimated speed, all that stuff is all on there. And then like I said, all 12 arrows are all weighed, and all those weights are on there, and all the arrows are within 3 grains of each other. I don't think I've ever violated that, but that's how consistent they are. They're cut very consistently in length and built. Like we said, I build them as the best I can. And if I ever find a better way to build them, I start using that process.
That's really cool.
That's kind of, it's a super, super custom arrow, all the way from the tuning of the arrow all the way down to the wrap. And it's so cool, man, to have, your buddies, you have a little hunting company or group and come up with a little logo or something. And man, we put that on there and everybody's got their name on it. And it makes it really cool. And the difference between having just a regular arrow and having one with, the custom wrap on it and custom tune for you is pretty cool. I've gotten a lot of really good feedback on it. And like I said, on those nights when I'm up at 12:30 and I get a message that says, man, I love these things. They're shooting great. Love them, blah, blah, blah. It keeps me going. And I really like giving people that experience and helping them shoot, people like, I've never shot this well. And it's like, no, you've never had anything that allowed you to shoot. So you had something inhibiting you. Now it's just letting you shoot. So yeah, that's kind of my process, and that's kind of what I do.
Well, there's one thing that I wanted to go over before we wrap this thing up. And we talked about a long time ago about the point of diminishing returns episode.
Yes. Yeah.
Go. I've been telling people that I think you had some sort of equation that could help us with that. Go over that and tell me what kind of where you're at with that whole thing. This is going back to the Brian Broderick conversation I had a long time ago, saying I want an equation that's like a calculator that's on the internet currently, like an arrow calculator, but it tells you at what point you have too heavy of an arrow and you're costing yourself momentum and all that stuff.
Yes. And this is something I actually started when I started doing equations. This is one that was really bothering me too. And it's you get to a thing where it's like, how far can you throw a bowling ball? I can't throw it very far. Well, how far can you throw a ping pong ball? It's lighter. You should throw it further. No, I can't throw it further either. but I can throw a baseball really well. And it's basically how to find that baseball weight, you know, for your bow. And I talked before about the draw weight versus the length, and the area under that curve is, like, in physics terms, that's the work done by the bow. And so that is your, you know, when you're throwing that baseball, you throwing the ball, your muscles and everything you have to put into that is the work. So what I went through was to find, and this is going to be a very hot topic, and I'll try to talk my way out of it here in a minute. But what I did was went through, and like I said, in my equations, I figured out how to estimate the speed of the arrow pretty accurately. Again, depending on how much a bow manufacturer might fudge on their IBO speed helps, but I could get it really, really close. And so what I did was went through and, you know, I could put in the bow IBO, the draw weight, and the draw length, and it'll go through. I have a big spreadsheet, and I can put in just a bunch of weights, and it'll go through and run for the weight of the arrow. It'll figure out the speed of the arrow. And once you have the weight and the speed, then you can figure out both the kinetic energy and the momentum from that. And this is, yeah, I know, man. It's a hot topic. And I'm not done with this. I'm not saying this is the law or anything yet, but this is all based on math, and it doesn't take into account a lot of real world variables that could affect this. It's right. Just a way to get to it. But kinetic energy is your velocity squared times your mass. And what happens is your velocity starts falling off faster than your mass increases. So you're based on math only, and these are not real world numbers. Because your velocity falls faster than your mass increases, your kinetic energy will peak. And that's all just based on numbers. And I know that this is like an archery topic, you know, fireball, but I need to get some real world data on speed and start shooting different weights to find out if that happens or how fast it actually falls off. The reason that it doesn't work math-wise, or doesn't work super precisely math-wise, is because the wind resistance on the arrow is what actually starts pulling more of that speed faster. So like the ping pong ball reaches a terminal velocity, meaning that it, you know, if it was moving any faster, it can't, because the wind resistance is pushing against it.
Right.
So like when you jump out of an airplane and you're falling, you'll reach a terminal velocity where you just won't accelerate anymore because you're being pushed up against, you know, from the drag on yourself. So
that makes sense. And also, yeah, I mean, there's so many variables, because what if you're using, you know, a 16 fletch versus a, you know, 3 fletch? I mean, yes, there's obviously going to be shed velocity differences, and it basically just your best way to put it is your ballistic coefficient, your coefficient of your projectile, your arrow, is going to change depending on exactly a bunch of different factors too. I imagine even shaft diameter probably even cuts down on it too, because that's just more surface area for crosswind or anything like that for it to affect.
That's all absolutely correct. And I know this formula it's flawed, but I'm trying to figure out like what's your IBO. I'll do yours and we'll see what roughly it's 340, and then your draw weight 70.
70, yeah.
And your draw length was 28.
Yeah.
So according to this, your ideal optimal arrow weight is 460 grains. Really? And that's, yeah. But that, again,
that's way lighter than I was expecting.
Yeah. It's because people ask me too about, you know, going back to your ballistic coefficient. You know, they can't get one for an arrow because it's too hard to figure, because of, you know, do you have 16 veins on it, and you have a huge broadhead on the front of it? Do you have a micro diameter? Is it a standard shaft diameter? You know, all those things. How much twist do you have on, or offset do you have to your veins, or is it a helical, or, you know, blah, 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 blah. Right. There's a lot that goes into that. But like when people ask me 3 fletch or 4 fletch, I try to push them to a 3-fletch because of a couple things, but one of them for this conversation we're having is basically kind of that parachute effect. So when when your arrow runs out of steam, I'll just say steam instead of kinetic energy or momentum, runs out of steam, those vanes and that ballistic coefficient are higher than if you had 3. And so you get what I call a parachute. I think everybody does a parachute effect on it, where once it's out of steam, it starts slowing down and dropping faster. The other reason I kind of like 3 over 4 is just less to go wrong. So if it's, if you're out hunting and, you shoot and somebody out there probably misses once in a while and you hit something or it rips a vane off, you want as few things to go wrong with it as possible. And if you don't have to run 4, then I don't run 4. But honestly, man, if you like to look at 4, if you have if it just makes you feel good to run 4, do it. I mean, I'm all for it. People are like, like when we're working on the wraps and they're like, well, I kind of like blue and, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, or shaft. I mean, I've had people go from an axis to a rampage or a rampage to an axis because of the color of the shaft. And I'm like, no, man, you got to look good to shoot good. And that's it. It's like, I shoot all kinds of weird stuff because I have arrows that, have all different vanes on them and different states of builds and everything. But if somebody feels more confident or they just want to have a different color shaft, man, that's it. But that's some people like running the 4 vane. Jonathan Metcalf of the Kong Valley guys, I build a ton for those guys, and he likes running 4. And it's like, yeah, man, let's run 4 then. It's all personal preference, but there are some drawbacks, and it's like, you get into this thing where it's like, is it really worth it, or is it, that 4,000th of a shaft tolerance, is it worth it? But it's all personal preference. So yeah, I'm sorry, back to the optimizer. You should always run 460 grains and nothing else.
Yeah,
so
I'm shooting
that's where it's at right
now. So I feel like I feel like I'm validated, I guess, right there.
Yeah, there you
I'm
go.
only 3 grains off of your equation, but I would suspect it's probably higher. And as you as you edit and like you mess with your equation, I wouldn't be surprised if your equation starts spitting out heavier arrows. Just from my experience and listening to just so many people talk about arrows and stuff. I mean, I've heard 8 grains per pound. I've heard 22 grains per pound now, or something like that. I don't know. I just want to know what the most efficient arrow is for my setup before I start losing momentum. I don't care about energy really. I just how much is that? And it'd just be fun to get like a UFC punching machine, and then just measure how hard each arrow hits at like 40 yards. Just to see. But that's a maybe if I ever make it to a millionaire on YouTube, I'll just buy my own machines and then I'll just spend my days testing shit.
And you're going to hire me, right? I think that was part of the deal.
Yeah. I'll just have you build all the arrows. I'll probably be breaking a bunch of them.
Done. Yeah, you'll just be out there sitting with a lawn chair and a margarita, hitting the Hooter shooter, making it shoot.
Exactly. Man, I'm shooting good today.
And I'm back there slaving away, building 9,000 arrows as you shatter them.
Oh yeah.
But no, I mean, this is a work in progress, and I'm really interested to get to shoot more and get a way to just increase the weight slightly and still keep shooting. But what we need to do, like you said, have that UFC punching machine and have a chronograph down there too to get the velocity, because that's kind of what you're working for. The other thing is, I think that this is all in theory, but if you're looking at what is my optimal arrow weight, and then you have to ask that question for what distance, because you want to have, like, I like to shoot out to 100 yards because I can really see variations in my setups at 100 yards. And you could really see variations, like field points to broadheads, stuff like that. But, so I shoot 100 yards. So I would want an arrow, excuse me, that was optimized out to 100 yards, where somebody is a strict hunter and they'll never shoot further than 60 yards because, you know, that might be a follow-up shot. Well, then you would want an arrow that's tuned to 60 yards. So basically it runs out of gas or it has enough punch to go to 60 yards and not 70.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If that makes sense. But
yeah, there's just so many different variables, but I think as we keep testing and growing here, we're eventually going to get it down. And I am shocked as hell that no one's actually sat down and already has this on the internet and figured it out. But it is really surprising.
It's a tough question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because think about the variables you'd have to put in there is, you know, number of vanes, offset, arrow diameter, broadhead. You know, you'd have to have the CV for every broadhead and every arrow diameter and the vane. You'd have to know the drag of the arrow basically to be able to accurately calculate that. So
yeah, for sure,
man. One day we'll get it.
Yeah. I graduated in algebra 2, so this was over my head after this times that times this. That was about the end of my ability for math. So I'm not gonna be much help on that. So as to totally class myself as a solid nerd and, you know, not make any popularity contest, I figure out instead for my front of center, the way I figure it is all with statics. And so I could put in any weight of anything and find out where the front of center is because you can, I won't go into it, but I figured it all with statics and with my own equations. If anybody's curious, I can elaborate on that. But like you said, we could go down that path for a couple more hours. Yeah, no, we could just plan on doing another podcast. You'd like a part 2 of advanced arrow building math.
Yeah, just arrow building 201.
Yeah,
and if anybody has questions, they could fill those in. And I mean, I think like I said, I love the stuff that you do, like your real world application of things and your real world testing of things.
Thanks,
is amazing. And like the way you go through it, it's better. You know, there's a lot of guys out there that just go, you know, oh, this broadhead's better because I've shot 12 deer with it. And it's like, no, I mean, that's good. And I'm glad it's working for you, but there's more empirical ways to do things where you can, you know, put some numbers behind things and quantify results. And I think you do a great job of taking, you know, just, I don't want to say backyard engineering, but application engineering and, you know, shooting it through realistic type things. The best situation you come up with. Nothing's ideal, but it's like the best we've got. So I'd love to come on and debate some things with you.
Yeah, I would love that. And thanks for the huge compliment, man. I mean, that's what we strive for, or I strive for. I keep saying we like I'm a team. It's just
no, we are.
Just a solo
it's archery in general, man.
Yeah. Well, you know, hopefully before I die, there's somebody that creates a standardized test for individuals to go out and test broadheads and arrows and setups and stuff like this, because it would be so nice to have a standardized test, you know, like an IBO for a bow. Why don't we have that for, you know, performance for everything else in archery? I don't know. I geek out on it, and there's no perfect test out there right now, and it just drives me bonkers. So
yeah, I agree. Like I said, I'm the same way as you. It is strange they don't have a standardized test for the IBO, because it should be governed by somebody. I think there's a lot of people out there that, you know, they're like, oh, I shoot a 350, and I'm like, you don't really shoot a 350. I'm just helping you.
I'm going to throw this out there. I was doing a bunch of research after seeing all these manufacturers be way off on their IBO speeds. Some of them, not all of them. And it's just interesting, because if you look at Hoyt, they go off of ATA. And a lot of these other manufacturers are IBO. Well, the only difference there is that IBO says 5 grains per pound. It doesn't say how many pounds. It says 5 grains per pound, right? But people have tied that to the standard 70 pounds, 30-inch arrow, and that's what everybody does.
Because that's the formula. Yeah,
that's the formula. But IBO says typically 5 grains per pound, and then so I think that's how some of these companies are saying, okay, well, let's do 5 grains per pound at 70 pounds or 75 pounds, and that's our IBO. Like that's what the IBO. And so, but I don't think they're being completely honest about that. And one thing about Hoyt is ATA strictly says 5 grains per pound, 70 pounds, 30. You know, they have all the requirements. It's just they just don't cap it at 5 grains per pound, and that's why I believe Hoyt uses the ATA. It's not a different measuring scale. It's the same thing. It's FPS and everything, but kind of interesting when you start comparing the ATA versus the IBO. And so, Hoyt's never been accused of being over exaggerating on their IBOs that I know of.
I agree.
From
what I've seen, what people tell me, and then when I tell them their estimated speed should be, that's using, like with Hoyt, with Bowtech, Elite. I'm trying to think of all of them but one, but Matthews, those are all really, really close. And there's going to be a lot of variables that that people can't, when you build a bow, we talk about all the variables in it, the string length, the cables, the limbs are going to have variation to them. So there is going to be slight differences, but it should be within a tolerance, like everything is,
Yeah, I'd like to see like a rangefinder says plus or minus 1 yard. It'd be nice if manufacturers had within plus or minus 2 feet per second or something like that. When you're off 10 to 15 feet per second, that's not cool. That's not cool.
Yeah. So there's just not a lot of brands out there that I'll say obsess as much as they should to do that. Yeah, no, I totally agree. But that's a whole nother conversation, man. So let's leave people with a few places where they can find you. Give yourself a plug, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Sure, man. Well, I really, really appreciate having me on. Honestly, there for a little bit, I forgot I was even on the podcast. I thought we were just hanging out and chatting, so that was really cool. So DCA Custom Arrows.com. They're at DCA Custom Arrows on Instagram. And if somebody is curious about getting some arrows made, the best way to do it is to go to my webpage, again, DCACustomArrows.com. Go to the contact form. You'll fill something out there. It'll have all the numbers that I need to have a conversation with you. It gives you a little time to run and find your hunting stuff and get it all together at your leisure. Fill that out, send it in to me. I apologize. It does sometimes take up to maybe like a week at the most for me to get back to you. I have a day job and have a family, and it just takes a little time. So I apologize for that, but I'm sure when people understand what's going on, it's fine. So it might take a little bit of time for me to get back to you, but I get back to every single person. Fill that out. I'll get to you, get back to you and get that stuff. And then we can go from there. But yeah, so at DCA Custom Arrows and DCACustomArrows.com.
Sweet, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. I'll plan on just having you back here within, another month or two, hopefully. And we'll go over a 2.0, what, like you said, like we can go over so much more stuff.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's, like you said, I guess I said, but I think it's good to have my side of things where I can maybe try to explain it with a little bit of math, and then to have your practical application of it. I think it's really cool to be able to have these discussions and then maybe get to the truth at some point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I'm kind of simple, Jack, when it comes to the numbers and stuff. So, it's nice having somebody be more technical with their language and be able to explain it into like an engineer, man. I mean, you're going to be able to break it down way better than I can. So I appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate all the work that you've done with the equations. And, I say it all the time on the podcast. I appreciate work ethic and I appreciate the attention to detail. And you've got both of those. And I think you're probably putting out a pretty damn good arrow. I haven't had you build me a set yet, but I wouldn't have any problems. Yeah, I wouldn't have any problems shooting something that you built.
Cool. I appreciate that. Thanks for the compliment.
No worries. All right, guys, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up, but I'll see you probably in the future, Kyle.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thank you.
All right, guys, that's this episode of the podcast. Be sure to check out the description box below. I'll have a link for Kyle down there. But very excited about this episode. I'm looking forward to getting some feedback from this one. But if you guys can, be sure to go sign up for that newsletter, www.onpointpodcast.com. You can sign up for it. It's free, and you'll get probably one a month. And then outside of that, it'll get you entered some custom giveaways, keep you up to date with what I got going on. And, it'll just be a win-win. So outside of that, Appreciate everybody listening, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.